Okay, so thanks so much for inviting me today. This is fixed. Do these both work? Okay. All right, great. So like I said, I blog at Wrench in the Gears. I keep sort of a list where I send out posts. I usually do a couple a month, and so if you would like to get on that list when I give presentations, just share your name and email, and I'll circulate that around. So thanks for having me today. I'm here with some great friends. I'm a mom, first and foremost, and I started out in activism around education in public schools. It has since grown to be my scope keeps getting wider and wider. Initially, we were fighting standardized testing, being weaponized for school closures. And then I was increasingly looking at the use of educational technology in schools in ways that led to increased profiling of students and dehumanization of the education process and the surveillance of the educational process. And then I realized it really wasn't about simply education, it was really about sort of using digital platforms to commodify all of our social relationships and in a way to manage poverty, especially communities that have been oppressed historically over time, Black and brown communities, indigenous communities in our nation. And so it's just the scope keeps getting bigger and bigger and more global, as I'm realizing a lot of these technological systems are also being channeled through sort of predatory systems of US aid and things that are being piloted in the global south are coming in. So my practice mostly is I follow a lot of money. And I have some people tell me, like, oh, you're this conspiracy theorist. And I'm like, well, it actually isn't a conspiracy unless it's hidden. But they're figuring that most folks don't really have the time or the inclination to really follow the money and map the networks. And so I use a lot, my background, my training is actually in art history and cultural landscapes and historic preservations. And so it seems like the landscape that I'm supposed to map is the landscape of racial capitalism, which I didn't expect when I started it. But these are maps that I make using crowdsourced software called Little Sis. It's also funded by some problematic sources, but as I track my money, it's almost like a mind map or like an annotated interactive bibliography that helps me both find things and make sense of the information I'm finding. So this, for example, is a map of a youth summit that happened here in Philadelphia in 1997, which was connected to the 1,000 Points of Light, which is faith-based government partnerships that was started under George Bush. And this event was connected through Harris Wofford. So it's bipartisan. All of the living presidents of that day came to Philadelphia to start focusing on youth issues. And what that had led to over time was something called America's Promise that was led by Colin Powell for a while and then evolved later into Ready Nation, which would become pre-K human capital bonds. And so it's interesting, what I tend to do is both situate myself in space and look back and look forward. It's because it really is the intersection of understanding our history as a nation and where our wealth and power derives from, which is specifically indigenous genocide and land theft and enslavement and forced coercive labor of Black and brown communities to wield our military power and our financial power. And so it's very important that that be grounded in not just of our nation, but more largely, specifically the doctrine of discovery, which goes back, and I think in a faith-based setting, it's really important to acknowledge the sense of Christianity, that was the legal method through which colonial processes happened, and if you were not Christian, that they could come, they could take you, your family, your children, your land, your assets for Christianity. And so really this legacy goes back, pre-Jamestown all the way to the maritime trade in human beings and those colonial powers. So that's how I work. Touching on, I wanted to start off with IBM. Because that's what Mr. Ford had talked about in his book. It has very specific connections to Philadelphia in terms of looking at ways in which we're in the middle of the presidential process right now, and there's lots of focus on candidates and political parties. And it's important to understand the ways in which technological systems are being enmeshed in our government data-driven government, open data government, ways in which technology companies like IBM, Oracle, Cisco are using data, again, which is never neutral, but perceived to be as neutral and unbiased, to make very key decisions around how we interface with our governments and the decisions that are made. And in some ways, I would posit that this technology allows elected officials to sort of stand in front as the faces of government, but actually they're deferring the power of the governance to these algorithmic systems that are rooted in racial bias. So that speaks to the world has changed, let's reinvent government. That's the AI, artificial intelligence, big data analytics. In 2011, IBM partnered with the city of Philadelphia and Michael Nutter and also his wife Lisa on a smart city grant. And it's interesting, I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of smart city technologies, but the idea of using networked sensor systems to generate data and have decision-making processes about the built environment and the way in which people move in this built environment. You hear the first physical infrastructure we had with those big belly trash cans that were supposed to report back with their sensor when they were full. And there's such a mess, those trash cans. But that was sort of our smart infrastructure. But the first big project was actually human capital. Okay, so we have to understand this process as a way of managing human beings in smart city environments. And so they created a program called Digital On-Ramps, which continues to exist today, is embedded within youth workforce development and summer programs. It was connected with Philadelphia Academies that Lisa Nutter was in charge of at the time, and is now embedded over at Drexel. So this is our connection to IBM. The other research I've been doing lately, I'm going to talk a lot about blockchain, is that IBM is looking at blockchain education systems, where essentially you no longer have physical schools. It's like a Pokemon Go model where through sensors you're just bumping around, proving you have competencies and the proper mindset, and demonstrations of competencies are then added to your portfolio of skills. And that's how artificial intelligence human resource analytics will be used to sift you in the global labor pool for gig economy jobs. But blockchain education is very much a focus of IBM, and you can see in their Institute for Business Value, because it's all about how do we extract value out of human beings. Again, part of this brutal history of violence is that they're talking about self-sovereign digital identity systems in which much data can be aggregated and that parents can choose to essentially sell their children's data in terms of accessing education and healthcare. So this is from 2019. This is a very recent document on digital identity, but it's important to sort of understand the role, like framing this within this IBM conversation specifically, that there are things that directly apply to Philadelphia. So I just want to reiterate why I lean pretty far left. I mean, at this point, I think I have a lot of concerns about the way the legal and judicial and constitutional systems of this country have been set up to preference private property, of which human beings are increasingly and have always been a piece of that. So I probably lean more communitarian anarchist at this point, like care for each other, but self-determination is really important. So as we're in the middle of this media deluge on a daily basis of what's happening and the Trump elements and the other things, is that what's going on, what we're living through right now, isn't really about partisan politics, and it's about a political economic structure, and it's a global economic structure that has everything to do with technology and advances in technology that are creating global systems that essentially feed transnational global capital, of which IBM is one of those companies. So there's not really a nationalist border right now for the 20, 50 people who own most of the wealth in the world. They're not citizens of any particular country in a meaningful sense. They're members of their own club. And so what's going on now is, and this is their headspace, and I don't know if they'll be able to accomplish all of these things, but my job is to sort of tell liberal folks to do racial capitalism, is that this is what they're thinking. And if we're not prepared to understand what they're talking about in the back rooms at Davos over cocktails, then we're not going to have the information we need to make good choices. And I personally have been burned in the past trying to push actions that I thought were the right answer and not fully understanding the problem, and then realizing that the work I put in actually advanced agendas that were counter to what I wanted. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm not going to tell especially oppressed communities what decisions to make, but that they should have the information if they want to listen to me, that it's good for them to have this information. So essentially what we're looking at, and we passed the new NAFTA, is this idea of platform labor, gig economy labor, that people, for the most part, are not having stable employment over their lifetime or even in the moment. They're juggling multiple gig jobs. And once through telepresence labor, like those little robots on a stick, and through video chats and TaskRabbit software platforms, that labor can be globalized. There is about to be sort of massive disruption, both that and increased automation and robotics. And so that's what they're talking about in Davos, is like, whoa, okay, many, many people are going to be displaced out of work. Then people will become reliant on public benefits. So when you're talking about Yang, the universal basic income, how do we keep people from being in the streets? Well, maybe UBI, you get enough to try to live off of to supplement your gig economy income. Those benefits, whether they be food stamps, housing, healthcare, education, will be privatized. So we are already seeing massive privatization of most of those systems, many of which into faith-based communities. Social welfare systems are being pushed into faith-based communities. And that the government will justify this by saying that they're just going to pay for things that work, what works. And it will be very fiscally prudent. And so that's very bipartisan, that the liberal interests say, well, people are being taken care of, and then the conservatives say, no, we're just paying if it's good. And what that means is it feeds all of the digital platforms, because all of our social relationships, the rise of telemedicine, teletherapy, ed tech, have to create the data to justify these deals. That means that people can be tracked who are using these benefit systems, right? And increasingly, it's on the phones, it's on the Obama phones, right? They're out there trying to get a phone in everybody's hand, because that's your tracker, and it's going to track what benefits you're getting and how you're using the benefits that you're getting and what the outcomes are. So that's a key piece. These digital identity systems on blockchain will aggregate the data, and then increasingly, in a weird gamified world, it will be like, if you don't comply, those benefits will get locked up. So if I don't know if any of you watched Black Mirror, there's an episode called Nosedive. So about like 3 years ago when I started looking into this, and I hadn't watched Black Mirror, and they said, this is what's happening, and they go, it's just like that Black Mirror episode. And yes, essentially this idea is that you are scoring people with a digital phone system, and that depending on your social credit score rating, your ability to access benefits, access housing opportunities, access travel are limited. And clearly now that is already going on in China. Through social credit scoring systems that are tied to Internet of Things, where if you don't, if it doesn't work out, you can't go up the elevator. If it doesn't work, you can't get through that gate. It's this idea of like limiting digital fencing systems based on people's behavior. And this smart city infrastructure is rolling out. We're getting 5G. You guys probably see on the streets of Philadelphia all the time. They're hanging all this stuff off of the light poles right now. And it's becoming a panopticon. So when we look at fourth industrial revolution economic systems of dispossession of people from meaningful work, and not just their economic basis, but something that gives meaning to their life. Because on the one hand, people do their work because they need to eat, but many people also do their work because it gives their life meaning. And especially people who are doing work in systems that are being privatized in education, in healthcare, in social work, in therapy, they get meaning from their work. And to work is really important. So the idea that just no one will work and we'll all just be data mined is not, I think, a very good prospect. So that's the overall context. Again, just speaking about the future of work, you'll hear this a lot now. Everyone's talking about what is the future of work. My thesis is the future of work is, for most people, is going to be behavioral compliance. Digitally demonstrating behavioral compliance with the program. They're talking about over 90% of occupations in the next 12 years could be automated. And this is sort of broadly, will they actually be able to accomplish it, and what's the time frame on that? It's unclear, but that is what technology is bringing to life. Last November, the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, the Chamber of Commerce, Drexel, and the city had a whole gathering on business innovations for the future of work. A lot of what I'm going to talk about with Pay for Success Finance is tied in with social finance, and Tracy Palangin was at this event. So these systems are being run through the Federal Reserve systems, and and it is about engineering U.S. labor force within a larger global labor force through the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So these are very key players that are involved in management of human capital in ways that both are profitable and hopefully maintain, the world from, people rioting in the streets. So I've made a couple videos over the course. I don't have great art skills, but sometimes visuals are very helpful for people. This is the economic pyramid, where most people are at the bottom, and especially black and brown folks are at the bottom, and this is of the world. And so what happens when you have a small number of people who have all the capital, and they need for capital to move in order for the system to work. So when the economic crisis happened in 2008, everyone said, don't hold on to your money, go out and spend it. Because if everybody stopped spending, the whole machine would fall apart. What happens when people can't spend? Because they have no liquidity, because their debt is maxed out, because they literally, I was meeting we had dinner with friends last night, and they said, I'm really about this Facebook group, free stuff or whatever, which is great. As a communitarian anarchist person, I think that's great. That does nothing for the global capitalists, right? That does nothing for Jeff Bezos and Goldman Sachs. Their stuff is going to start to get illiquid unless they can find a new circulatory system. And my understanding of this machine as I have mapped it is that essentially the idea is that just like they turned housing and mortgages into innovative systems for legalized gambling, that the next thing, because the wealth concentration has only increased over the past decade, the only thing comparable to put that capital into is people, right? The only thing that we have more of than real estate is really human beings. And so what is being put in place now is a system to commodify massive numbers of people as financial instruments through privatized social services. And that has to happen through public-private partnerships. And that is what is being set up through austerity. So we have mass dispossession. How do you make money on it? And how do you control people? Because once you have these digital systems of digital identity, you have the signals intelligence, which I had talked about before, then you also have systems of controlling groups and individuals, especially if your benefits live on your Obama phone and they can have a drone sniff your IP address and you're at a protest and they zap your benefits, right? All of those technological systems are in place now. They're just not socially acceptable yet, right? They're just not fully acceptable. And they're not quite scalable. They haven't scaled them, and they haven't got us to the point that we will accept that yet. So I'm trying to get out in front and say, let's not. Okay. So this is from the San Francisco Federal Reserve. They're one of the offices that is way out ahead, although Patrick Parker at the Philly Fed, who's a Wharton person, is very much in this as well. This is an article by Steve Rothschild on human capital performance bonds. So it's interesting when I mapped this, there's sort of a geography to it. There's the interest in Silicon Valley, there's the interest in New York City finance, there's the Boston global venture capital and military industrial complex, and there's the Washington policy node. What I wasn't really expecting was the Twin Cities. So actually, Stephen Rothschild and Art Rolnick, who was the head economist at the Minneapolis Federal Reserve in the mid-90s, created this idea of performance-based government contracts and linking them into human capital performance. And so this innovative financial tool was set back in the mid-90s, but not really ready to bring to scale yet, because even at that time, cloud-based computing, Internet of Things was not nearly online the way it is today. So these human capital performance bonds shifted to something called social impact bonds and now pay for success. And you can see how the Federal Reserve in that top corner is talking about workforce development, pay for success, that they will skill you and reskill you for jobs you may never actually get because those jobs don't exist. But as long as you're jumping through the hoops and earning competencies and getting skills in your locker, someone can bet on whether you get the skill or you don't get the skill. And it enables the gambling system. The other thing it's important to realize, again, Michael Nutter, as soon as he left being mayor, he became an advisor on the Federal Reserve, he started working for Homeland Security, and he became Michael Bloomberg's right-hand man. And Michael Bloomberg is the key figure in what works big data-driven government. And so a lot of what we're seeing in Philadelphia was a direct result of Michael Nutter's, he was a policy wonk. I mean, he's a really smart guy, and I think Kenny's slid on the heels. He's not, has the same knowledge of policy, but much of this is put in place by Michael Nutter. So again, this is global, and as I said earlier, a lot of this is predicated on US global aid systems, the State Department, USAID, UKAID, this idea that they realize massive numbers of people will be in motion due to climate catastrophe, due to economic unrest, due to militarization, and they want to both control the movement and create profit. So a lot of these systems, ID 2020 is running out of the UN. It's developed with Accenture and Microsoft. So the challenge for me as someone on the left is that the conservatives are the people who tend to get me most quickly, and they're like, the globalists. And I'm like, we're the globalists. It's IBM and Exxon. Like, we're the globalists, mostly. Not exclusively, but it's transnational global capital. It is, yes, the Accenture and Microsoft are using the infrastructure of the United Nations to run their global human capital markets. Because the UN Sustainability Development Goals, there are 17, only I think about 5 of them have anything to do with climate change. And again, this will be data-driven, Internet of Things, smart financialization of nature for global impact investors. The rest are anti-poverty. And the anti-poverty program runs on everyone getting a number. Right, and it's not going to be the number that Clyde talked about, like in the Holocaust, but it will be a different number, and it might initially live on your Obama phone, and then eventually it'll be an RFID chip. So we have to break down some of our understandings of these systems. I totally know that we have screwed up the planet and the environment. I'm very concerned about the ways in which climate catastrophe and this linking of digital identity systems and managing refugee populations, displaced populations for global finance is playing out. And it's something that not enough people know about. So that's ID 2020. So Michael Bloomberg is a big piece of this, and he's on it. He's in all the social media feeds these days. His undergraduate, electrical engineering at Johns Hopkins. Right, I did not know that until last week. So he got his electrical engineering, then he got his Harvard MBA, and then he worked for Salomon Brothers, which was innovative bond instruments. Right, and then he did Bloomberg, which essentially isn't publishing, it was data analytics for finance. And so he created digital infrastructures to run that signals intelligence systems for the finance industry. Mayor of New York, the most powerful financial center in the world, created all of the policy infrastructure that could then be scaled through What Works Government, which Michael Nutter took on the road. And now at this point, Bloomberg Philanthropies has over 500 cities, money in over 500 cities. He and Harvard have teamed up. They've trained about 150 US mayors to do data-driven government and AI government. Okay, so Michael Bloomberg doesn't actually have to win the presidency to take over most of the United States through his big data analytics. And so what Harvard Kennedy School has done is to really push performance-based contracting. And again, they're really good at the semiotics, right? Because they say, what works government? And if you say, well, I'm kind of concerned about what works government, because really what that means is like, kindergartners on tablets. And they're like, well, what the things that don't work, right? And so like we have to disrupt their framing, because they've paid the most sophisticated social scientists, and all of the Ivy League institutions are rubber stamping this. But they're the same ones that owned slaves to begin with, right? Like Brown and Harvard and Georgetown. So this history is embedded in our present moment. Pay for Success is here. Pay for Success is the successor to social impact bonds. I did not realize this until relatively recently, that in 2016, there was a city council hearing that Cindy Bass and Derek Green, I think, they brought it, and so they had a hearing to talk about using social impact bonds in the city. We just now, last year, Comcast is doing workforce training through a Pay for Success deal. Again, this is again with the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Chamber, training and reskilling. I will say, and it was difficult in this hearing, and there's a great transcript of it, is that they talked a lot about anti-recidivism, and we're hearing a lot about mass incarceration right now, which is a huge problem. Something I didn't get to say to Michael earlier is that the new model is essentially, I call it prison reform to incarcerate the world. Because at this point, with the exception of people who are really, maybe people who are being tried for murder will be physically incarcerated in physical. Global finance doesn't really want to build all the prisons it would take to hold dispossessed people, and it doesn't really want to pay for that many guards because that cuts into their profit. What they'd really rather do is have you incarcerated with drones and electronic surveillance and put you on pathways, diversion pathways, to be processed by social service networks to profit the global investors. So they'd like to continue to criminalize poverty and profile people into these systems that, again, even if you're not poor, probably somebody in your life that you care about is a social worker or a teacher, and then their job is going to be to watch the dashboards of all of those people, and then they'll be implicated. So ultimately, we'll all either be oppressors or oppressed people, running this with the exception of the 50 people on top who are fronting for Goldman Sachs and UBS and Deutsche Bank globally. And I really do believe in my heart that a lot of the technological systems that are tied in with this, with biometrics, are connected to these prototypes that are happening based largely on what we did to indigenous people on concentration camps and reservation camps, of applying these technology systems of controlling access to benefits, food, shelter, that are playing out in Gaza. Okay, and Hewlett-Packard is a huge player in all of this. And Michael Bloomberg is also doing work in Israel, and Ronald Cohen in social finance. And so they have these prototype spaces where we're looking at digital geofencing and biometrics and how do you control populations in non-traditional ways. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. So we have this poverty committee. I've attended several of their hearings. They don't seem to really, it never occurred to them to talk about the gig economy. So that might tell you something. That was me, I went and testified about supportive housing. So the nodes for these deals are going to be education, healthcare, and supportive housing, right? Because they'd like to put everybody in a smart house and get their data. So we have a lot of poverty in Philadelphia. And the Philadelphia economy, Pennsylvania economy, they said we're going to be the Silicon Valley of impact investing. If you guys hear about impact investing, social impact investing, that's poverty mining. That's what do you do if you have a lot of it and that you can make money? Well, we've got a lot of poverty. The impact investors are setting up new tools of innovative finance and digital technologies to make money off of that poverty. And so we've had several gatherings in Philadelphia by Total Impact, the Good Capital Project. And so they're bringing all of these folks in who are going to talk about how to make money off of poverty. And you can look at the videos of them. I mean, Mary Scullion fronted the room. She gave the welcoming remarks like, hey, the Catholic Church thinks it's great to mine poverty. It's all good. Don't worry, the nuns up here. So, but if you look at the room, it's all full of bankers. It's hard to say that those folks really think that their interest, if you create a global investment market in poverty, are you really incentivized for poverty to stop?
Right.
You're not. You're incentivized to manage it well and to grow it in a way that's profitable, right? And that's the reality of what we're dealing with, is we're creating a global financial market of poverty. And no one's framing it that way. They're just like, oh, we're unlocking capital to help people. Well, if what you're doing is essentially financializing people as financial instruments for the profit of already very powerful interests, that there's no justice in that. There's no justice in that. So I'm going to talk a little bit how pay for success works, but essentially the other piece about the tech is predictive analytics, okay? And that's what big data is very good at, is crunching numbers and whether or not it's accurate, because the predictive analytics doesn't have to mean that it's really going to happen, but if the most powerful interests use their data and say, this is going to happen, it doesn't matter if regular folks are like, I don't think it's going to happen. They're the ones with the force of law and the military behind them to say, this is our prediction. So these cost offsets of pay for success, it actually goes back to carbon credit trading. And this is where the UN Sustainability Development Goals come in. This idea of, if we don't do something very bad is going to happen down the line that's going to be really expensive to fix. And we're not going to have that money. So we're going to justify it by putting money up front. And if we fix it with this smaller amount of money, and then we can offset it against that big amount of money out there, and then we've saved. Look how much money we've saved. It's already based on the prediction that the bad thing happened. So in the carbon, and I'm not trying to be anti-science, but it's a way of financializing things. They say this bad thing, we're going to put a price on it. We're going to put a price on it if we do it now. We're going to put a price if we don't do anything and we wait. And the difference is something that is our savings, and then we can negotiate our profit out of that slice. So for people, Those cost offsets are going to be things like special education, underemployment or unemployment, chronic illness, diabetes, mental illness and addiction, and incarceration. So it really is almost like a pre-crime, and a lot of the prison reform things that we're seeing now, based on working with youth, is a pre-crime premise, that if you use data analytics and increasingly tracking behaviors to sort of predict children and their families into criminal activities, which we know is how the system has always been run, and then you create a profit center off of that, you're really going to start predictably profiling a whole lot of people into pre-crime. So these are the things, we're going to fix them up front, but not because there's any guarantee they would have been broken, although we could break them if we wanted to. That's how this machine is going to work. So essentially, so let's start off on the left side. So pay for success. So you privatize services. Ongoing austerity is part of the equation. If the government actually had money to run, you couldn't have the public-private partnerships, because the government would do it. And then if the government didn't do it, they would be accountable to regular folks, and they would get elected or not elected. It has to be privatized. This past decade plus of austerity has set the stage for what's coming. Then you've got these outcomes-based contracts, and that's what Steve Rothschild modeled, like performance contracts. You say that what is successful is something narrow. So in this case, it is like a test score, and this is where I was coming from in my education stuff. You say that success is a good third grade test score, reading score. Well, we know, I mean, those of us who really care about what it means to be truly educated, there may be some facet of data that you know, but it's not true educated for what purpose, right? It educates you that you can score well on a test created by a corporate interest for that purpose. But it is a narrow measure. It is not in any way a holistic measure of what it means to be educated. You have investors who would front for services, like all this free educational technology all of the schools get, because that's going to get their data. And then increasingly, this debt is going to be securitized. And I have a slide that talks about this for pre-K. They're going to securitize the debt, and then you'll get to watch people. Essentially, once you create a data-driven process, whatever thing you're tracking, that gives you the chance to surveil them all the time. So that's why we moved from end-of-year testing to benchmark testing to ed tech, is that increasingly the system wants more and more data, and you can control people through those data systems. You have a third party that will review the success, and that's how these contracts are set up to give it legitimacy. In this case, I put in parentheses Palantir, and I don't know if how many of you are familiar with Palantir. It's Peter Thiel's company, super evil company. They're working on predictive policing and ICE and border enforcement, and there's really sneaky and evil. In this case, it was a housing social impact bond, and the deal reviewer was Palantir. Okay, so you're in the Bay Area in California, and you maybe have someone in your house that doesn't have all their papers in order, but now to access affordable housing or supportive housing, your data's run through Palantir. So then the third party says, oh, you're good, or you're not good. But clearly they always try to pick and negotiate the metrics that are going to work for Goldman Sachs, because that's how this game goes. And the cycle goes. And people say, well, we're only paying if it works. Well, once you securitize the debt and you start trading that on global markets, there's going to be someone who will short that outcome. There's going to be someone out there who's going to say, I don't think it's going to work. I'm going to short you. So it really totally undermines this premise of what works government, because once you trade it on global markets, there will be people who are betting that it does work and people who are betting that it doesn't work. So then essentially what you're doing is you're setting up systems where people are betting against poor people's lives, which is kind of crazy, but there you go. The other thing is, for those of you who are in education, is you're only going to want people in your programs that are going to make you look good if you can get away with it. So like in the schools, charter schools or different schools, they only want people in who are going to like make them look good on their scores or what have you. And so they, even if they let you in, if they don't think it's a good fit, like you get counseled out. What does that look like for all social services? So if you have someone who's really broken and they don't look like they're going to get fixed cheaply, like you don't want those folks. And if you want people who are only kind of broken, they're actually not that bad, but they don't have a lot of growth prospect, they're not that attractive. The people that you want to identify are the people who are really broken but can be cheaply fixed to have a big growth boost. And so when we hear about grit and resilience and all of these things, they want the gritty people who go through hell and look terrible on the data dashboard and with like a little spit and polish can jump up to a good number. And that's going to make your deals, and that might offset some of the other folks that make it into your portfolio who are not so good. But that's how this actually looks with people. A big market for this is pre-K, universal pre-K, okay? Because this machine wants as many people as possible. Actually, it starts with home visits. It starts with prenatal home visits. Like, that's about the earliest. They can't get you preconception at this point. But really, they want in your business as early as possible. But for now, universal pre-K, South Carolina is the model, actually. And I've been in touch with the treasurer, state treasurer of South Carolina, who is a mature white Republican man, and I sent him all this stuff, and he said, "Thank you for telling me about racial capitalism. Like, I didn't know." He said he's probably not going to be a social justice warrior, but like he did, like, and I'm not justifying that, but like my thing is to tell white folks not to do racial capital. Like, this is what this is. So anyway, South Carolina is the home visit, but look, in 2018 they had a conference in New York City for preschoolers. Global Finance. It was a business conference, and if you were a pre-K advocate, you couldn't attend without the endorsement of 4 vetted business people. So they were not going to let you in the room, and it was global. And they rang the NASDAQ bell, and they were on Times Square, and they said, like, look, we have all of these investment opportunities in pre-K and workforce development. And this is built off of, and this is where the higher education comes in, all of these esteemed institutions, and not surprisingly, this is out of University of Chicago, but weirdly it's the Becker-Friedman School of Economics, which is funded by Open Society, this project. So when they say it's right or left, it's like when you're thinking like George Soros is funding people out of the Becker-Friedman School, the Chicago boys, it gets really complicated. But James Heckman, who's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, has created an equation that said, like, pretty much what we can do is, in early childhood, we can get you an annualized 7 to 10% rate of return on your investment. But the data that we can do to fulfill our deals, cognitive data doesn't work because IQ hardens up around the age of 10. It's not dynamic enough for the markets. But what we can change is character. And we can do it digitally. So all of those PBS Kids apps, all of these apps for toddlers, these school-ready apps, are about tracking behaviors and creating baseline data profiles of social emotional learning so that they can manipulate it for these finance deals, which is super messed up and sickening. But that's what's happening, and that's what Daniel Tiger's Tea Party game is, because James Heckman and the Human Capital Economic Opportunity Working Group have social emotional learning conferences where you can watch all of their videos where they sit in the oak panel rooms like this, and with UCLA Crest that does military consulting and says, oh, this is how we can get the kids and their parents to play these apps. And he actually, at one point, they said, we can't get them to play the apps. We really need the data. We can't get the parents to use the apps. And Heckman actually says, well, you're acting like the parents are experts. They're not experts. They're just dumb. Like, and these are Head Start parents, is who they're talking about. They're like, those people, you should gamify it for them. Like a build a kid game, right? Like gamify it. But you need good incentives, like pornography. Okay? So this is the kind of world that we're working in, is where high-power academic individuals who are coming from this frame of reference of finance and hubris and structural racism are saying, we're going to work with the military to come up with digital technologies to deliver returns on black and brown kids using PBS Kids apps. And I told the community outreach person for HYY, our local NPR station, about my concerns. And I was at an event where they were controlling all the nonprofit media, and the person looked at me and they said, what do you want me to do? Like, we all take the money. I built my whole career on Ford Foundation grants. So that's why I'm here, because like somebody who isn't taking the money has to say, Daniel Tiger's Tea Party game is not a good plan. This is from Ready Nation. And America's Promise. This is 2012 with Kaufman, which is out of Kansas City, is saying that social impact bond assets for pre-K are going to be traded among investors worldwide as asset-backed securities. So, like, I wish I was making this up. I wish none of this was real. They don't say this out loud very often. This is the one place that I've actually found that they're working. But Ready Nation is working with Art Wolnick and Robert Duger, who's Paul Tudor Jones's former asset manager. Paul Tudor Jones, most of this was actually incubated as infrastructure in the Harlem Children's Zone, not surprisingly, so it's a very long lead time. And that was funded through the Robin Hood Foundation. The Robin Hood Foundation is backed by Paul Tudor Jones, major hedge fund manager, who had he got his start in commodities futures trading in cotton futures. Okay? So that's where the history meets the future, is that if we don't reckon with that past. So the other piece of this, it looks like online preschool. Okay, so Waterford Upstart is an online preschool program. It's run for social impact finance. We have it in Philadelphia. This is the Read by Fourth campaign. Okay, this is the woman, I think her name is Jenny, saying, and they're working, the Read by Fourth campaign is tied in with the impact investors because it's third grade reading scores, and they're doing online pre-K in Philadelphia. They're targeting refugee families. Okay, and they're saying, well, it's better than nothing that they get some online pre-K, you know. It's for global finance is why they're running these kids. And you can look up Waterford Upstart. I mean, this is from the New York Times. They're saying like, oh, online pre-K is actually being targeted at low-income people. And it's because it's for human capital investing, because they can run on that. But that is in Philadelphia, and it's, again, given legitimacy. And I love reading. I don't want to be against the reading program. But when the reading program people are partnering with online pre-K for refugees and not owning up to the fact that it's human capital finance, that's a problem, and they need to be held accountable to that. And I've talked to them. I went to them in person and told them what was going on. So it's not like they don't know. Like, my job is to run around and say, when this happens, you can't say you didn't know, because I came to tell you that this is what's happening. So anyway, so this is Heckman. He was funded also by J.B. Pritzker, the current governor of Illinois. Again, Chicago, that piece is the commodities futures market. They took their roadshow up and down the state of California. All the community foundations is going to be running through the Philadelphia Foundation, because, okay, and this is what I'm saying, for faith communities who have endowments, they're going to frame this as like doing well by doing good, like you're investing in like low-income kids. You need to know the truth of it. You can read the quote over there. I will just say, Hatch Education, this is what this actually looks like, the infrastructure of it. Surveillance play tables. So what they want is they want social data, because that's what they said they can change. These tables have fisheye lenses on two sides. The kids are supposed to play on them. They're like a flat screen TV, like you move stuff, but there's a rubric that scores their behavior. Okay? Now, the one thing I don't yet know is if it's AI scoring the behavior, or if there's like someone in the Philippines like scoring their behavior. But there's a score, there's a rubric on that, that's what's on the top. So that's the data that's going to feed these systems. A lot of this is running through EduCare, which is a franchise pre-K program. I was down in Tulsa a couple weeks ago, and I have confirmation in Tulsa, which is being backed by George Kaiser, who owns the Bank of Oklahoma and the second largest community foundation in the country, and oil money, that they're using these Hatch Education surveillance play tables in the EduCares in Tulsa. Okay, so you know, it's actually really happening. I mean, we talked, this is going through Strive Together, which is their human capital project, and they confirm that. So again, I was just talking about Palantir and their homelessness breakthrough, you know, with the data. The other piece of this is another pay for success program around the opioid crisis. This is, you know, also very relevant for Philadelphia. The opioid crisis is an impact market. They're also developing biometric wearables for our Safe Injection Center, which is being set up as an impact market. And I'm very much in agreement that people in addiction should have the support that they need. I do not, and actually we had a conversation with the head of, I can't remember, it was behavioral health services or whatever, but like, could you give informed consent to have data collection if you're in active addiction with wearable technology? And I said, if we're gonna be the first city in the country to do this, we need to have an ethical conversation about what that means for people who are in active addiction to become human capital assets for global finance. And are they in any position? Both like toddlers giving informed consent about their data, as well as people in active addiction giving informed consent about their data and how it's being used and to what end. So this was a group of mothers who were in Connecticut, which is Ray Dalio is also very much involved in this. They had both a Child Protective Service involvement and an addiction reference. So those women were put as part of like a program that was, you know, endorsed by Yale, and they had someone come like have them pee in the cup 3 times a week and like tell them stuff. But these women, for the most part, were making $10,000 a year. in Connecticut with a family. That tool did nothing for them economically. It did not change their prospects whatsoever. And so someone was making money off of their peeing in a cup metrics changing, but at the end of the program, those women were still with children, single parents making less than like $10,000 a year, but BNP Paribas Bank and QBE Insurance, which is a French bank, QBE Insurance, which is an Australian bank, and the Reinvestment Fund, which has money in both of these, were making money off of these women's situations. And so essentially those women were part of somebody's global human capital finance program, which is exactly what we did through hypothecation with enslaved people when they were able to draw value out and expand plantations and infrastructure by using slaves as assets to create more money for global finance. We have done this forever, and now it's part of transnational global capital, like in an even bigger way. So we just need to disrupt this narrative and understand that that's what's happening. So they want to track everybody on blockchain. Essentially, it's all about pathways. You'll hear lots and lots and lots about pathways. You're going to get on a pathway to the career. You're going to get on a pathway to, clean and sober. It's some sort of pathway. This little dollar sign up there is a video about meet Kathy, your community care coordinator. And Kathy and her nonprofit service provider get paid every time this person does the thing they're supposed to do. So in this video, it was about health, and it was Joe who was incarcerated. And they thought Joe would do better if his wife and daughter were also doing better, but it turns out the daughter has asthma and the wife smokes. So now all of a sudden, everybody in Joe's household is on a pathway with Kathy watching them through their data so that someone can make money off of that. And the only reason that the mom, and I work in Southwest Philadelphia. There are many reasons a kid can have asthma I'm not saying it's great to smoke in your house, but that this kid could have this health impact that had nothing to do with the mom. But now, because of Joe and incarceration, everyone's on a pathway. So they're tracking, and how are they going to track you on the pathway? Is blockchain. Some sort of digital identity system. They haven't scaled blockchain yet, but that is coming. So that's Tanya and I. We were standing outside the Girard College. So this is the Chamber of Commerce. This is 2018, I guess. So they were having an event there, and it was the Chamber of Commerce saying, we're going to make decisions about education in Philadelphia and the business side of things, but you couldn't come in unless you were a Chamber of Commerce member. So we went and we kind of blocked there, where you could walk in, but you couldn't drive into Girard College. And we said, our kids are not, our education system isn't for the Chamber of Commerce. Right now the economy is not doing well for so many people. Why would we feed our children into an economy that's so bad when, if they were educated, they might come up with some other economic system that totally disrupts us, that makes things better for people? Why would we educate them into your system that we know is only making things worse? And so what they're doing is creating an engineered economy, and this is where the left-right thing is complicated, because on the right they're saying the communists are taking over with their engineered economy. I'm like, no, but it's IBM. It's Boeing. They're the ones who want to run the economy. They're engineering, and what happens if the Chamber of Commerce can essentially engineer human capital to their specifications in real time? They're just going to suppress wages. They'll say, I would like 1/3 extra so I can cream the crop and pay them the least. That's how this is going to work. And so ONET is based in Raleigh-Durham, and that's where all the labor analytics are, and that's where all of the codes for all the jobs, every job has all these sets of codes that are going to be tied in with the data analytics and the tracking and the learning record stores to track you and use the AI algorithms for sorting jobs. But not just jobs the people in North Carolina are competing with other people in North Carolina. On platform labor, you're competing with people in Sri Lanka and people in Norway and I like all those people, but we shouldn't all be competing against each other for pennies on the dollar to do this work of building this virtual world that they want us to build. So this goes way back to Mark Tucker, and if you heard, there's something called the Dear Hillary letter. That was when the Clintons came into office. Mark Tucker said, we're going to do this apprenticeship program. So this goes back. And so this is built on this idea of a perpetual underclass. The United Way is part of this as well. So ALICE is their program. It's called Assets Limited Income Constrained Employed. So that's the working poor. That means you're working, you really don't have much stuff, and you're unstable. This Alice platform underneath is a blockchain investment platform out of the UK, which I think there's a reason it's also called Alice. But this idea that essentially people through blockchain could become investable commodities. And this is a libertarian program out of Idaho, where they're talking about faith-based community using blockchain to distribute assets in digital wallets. And this is where the faith-based piece comes in. So like we all know how people are already crowdsourcing like their emergency surgery and their car repairs, right? And things happen, their apartment catches fire. Like we're already crowdsourcing things online. Like with blockchain, like you could start like crowdsourcing your next week's food for your kids. And if certain interests, powerful interests, think you're a good bet, like your analytics look good, like if their compliance to the pathways look good, like they'll invest in you for global returns, but not so much. And there's actually a really good book, I think it's by M.T. Anderson. It's a YA book called Feed. And it's about, like one of the main characters is a homeschool kid. And it's about investable commodities. And she goes and she wrecks all of the profiles and like goes to the mall and picks up all sorts of random stuff so they can't profile her. But then eventually she has like a terrible illness and no one will invest in her health because they're like, we don't know what your brand is. Like we don't, I'm sorry, like we don't know what you are. And so like, it's just very telling that that's, so yeah, so blockchain is this idea, here's some of my other art, is that it's essentially what happens. Everyone's like, capitalism's over. And I'm like, no, it jumped into the virtual world. Y'all didn't notice it jumped into the video game world. It's the augmented reality world, and that's what's coming. So the next settler colonial frontier is augmented reality. And Knight Foundation is very much about that. They're working, Pokemon Go was advanced by Gilman Louie, who was backed by In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture capital arm. Like, and if anyone was sort of looking like, hey, are people interested in virtual, like augmented reality worlds, which is again geofencing, digital geofencing the world, people are like really into it if it's a game and they don't realize it's a digital prison. So the blockchain is a way of holding your assets in a digital space. So your assets, but also your debt and payments. Your property that you own, your qualifications, your voting, your benefits, your healthcare, all of that they anticipate living on blockchain. And it's not just that information, but it's also a digital wallet with incoming payments and outgoing payments. And you tie that in with social credit scoring, and it's essentially it goes back to technocracy in the 1930s. You should look it up, but digitally engineered society, and now they have the technology to do it. Or just start to do it. So these are all proofs of concept. I know this sounds probably like, what is she talking about? But they're already like, they've got little bits and pieces together. So the first blockchain baby, sorry this is a little cut off, was born in Tanzania. So that's why I'm talking about globally. They tracked an unborn child and the mother on their maternal health care. And they said, oh, if you comply with all of the protocols, you can earn tokens, good behavior tokens, and it'll be like, you could redeem your umbrella token for an umbrella. And I will say, like, I think women should all have access to good prenatal health care. I also think that knowing our past history, as Mr. Ford was saying, around eugenics and maternal death and manipulation, that if I were a Black woman, I might be concerned about Johnson & Johnson's agenda, like around my healthcare program, and with legitimate concerns. And so once we start to gamify those really important life or death things, we need to think about that. Amply is the pre-K blockchain program. So the pre-K data and the surveillance play table data will live on Amply. So Amply was developed in Cape Town with UNICEF and Pierre Omidyar of eBay. Okay, so again, auctions, right? There's a lot of history to that, human capital and auctions. So Pierre Omidyar is looking at developing digital identity. UNICEF, again, once you scale this in a cloud-based world, it can be all over. People in Philadelphia know about Amply. At that same meeting where we talked about the Daniel Tiger Tea Party game, there was someone else in that meeting who said, we've been briefed on Amply. Nobody knows about it. Not many people know about that. This is not in any major media stuff. That we need to think about that with the universal pre-K. Bloomberg is putting unhoused people on blockchain in Austin. It's tied to MyPass and Margaret Wood Johnson Foundation as part of that. In Illinois, they're partnering blockchain birth certificates. And in Dallas and Tulsa, they're putting high school transcripts on blockchain. And my gut is that they figure most people are not paying attention to unhoused folks, and they'll say, well, then they get health care, because they would lose their stuff. It's just so much better to just have they're not to the point of retinal scan yet, but you don't have to worry about it, just scan your retina and know all your stuff. But in Dallas and Tulsa, and this is coming through Learning Machine, actually, the Dallas one is a different company. The Tulsa transcript is Learning Machine, which is MIT. If you came in and said, we want to put preschoolers on blockchain, they'd be like, I don't think we need to put preschoolers on blockchain. What are you talking about? And then people start to look into it. If you say, hey, we have a really robust high school transfer program, you can put all your stuff on it. Isn't this really cool? You can really sell yourself in the workforce. If we have this cool blockchain transcript, you can put your whole life on it. And then people, especially if you get free college, like these college promise programs, don't you want to sign up for our high school blockchain transcript? People are like, yes, that's perfect. That's just what I was looking for. And so in the US, it's coming in through the high school transcript programs. And this is what it looks like. This is what your food stamps look like on blockchain. So this is still a proof of concept. This is part of the State of Illinois Blockchain Task Force Working Group paper. And this is where behavioral economics encoded digital nudges is. And this is where what Mr. Ford said about it not being neutral. It isn't neutral. It's about choice architecture. It's about ones and zeros. And so in this case, you can see there's a welfare applicant that has a self-sovereign identity system. And there's about 80 or more companies now globally working on digital identity. You have a benefit wallet. So that's, again, it's on your phone until it's a chip in your hand eventually. And you go to the grocery store and you can make two choices. You have a choice, right? You could choose the apple or you could choose you can make the good choice or the bad choice. Now again, this is all on the individual. None of this is looking at the structure of what does that community look like? What does that person's work schedule look like? What is that person's gas? Do they have a place to cook? Are they living out of their car? None of that matters in this equation. It's just, are you choosing correctly the choice that we would like for you to make? And then if you make the good choice, we'll zing you a little money back. And it's an incentive until essentially the amount in your wallet only works if you always make the good choice. And that's how these systems go. So that if you always make the good choice, you make it to the end of the month. If you don't, you're going to be hungry that last week. Your kids are going to go hungry. And so what I would say is this very basic structure, and this is through these automated contracting systems. Actually, the friends I spoke with last night, they were saying they work at some fancy place downtown, and that there's a tray, and they put the food on the tray, I guess, in the cafeteria, and it takes a picture and it tells them the price. So there's some sort of visual recognition system of the food that's both then tracking to that person's payment system, the food that they buy over time, aggregated. Not any one bit of this data is that significant, but over time it's huge. We need to think about that. This system could be anything. And now, what does that look like for a digital education voucher where you actually have no schools because your schools have all been closed for asbestos? And all of a sudden, the school is in the church basement with AmeriCorps and a Chromebook, and the curriculum on the Chromebook, well, the evidence-based curriculum that supports the Chamber of Commerce Workforce Pathways, that's got a cost subsidy on it, because, it's evidence-based, but, that Black Panther curriculum, that's going to be an upcharge, right? And we're going to know you got it, we're going to know the metadata, and we're going to know all the kids in the room will also upload that. That's what we're talking about. And no one is talking about this yet. And so, even though we have these huge debates, these presidential debates, I'm not the only person that knows this is being planned. That we're not, this is like a sea change. It's not a change, it's building on this platform that we've always had, but in ways, as Michael was saying, it's going to come after everyone. I didn't think I would be using my 50s to do this thing. I'm not writing books, I'm not getting a degree in this, I'm just but it is coming after all of us. So behavior, we're really big at Penn. Angela Duckworth, we have the first municipal nudge unit. Thank you, Michael Bloomberg and Michael Nutter. So Bloomberg is working with the UK, Behavioral Insights. They were doing work actually in Syria with Syrian refugee kids. The MacArthur Foundation had a program to solve a world problem, and they ended up giving the money not to Angela Duckworth over here, who was partnering with KIPP and Summit and the Philly and New York City public schools, because those weren't enough people. They were working on Syrian refugees to put IBM AI tablets in the hands of all of those kids. But it's all about nudging, digital nudging. The biometrics are tied to it too. So this, again, when we're talking eugenics and different pieces, in the predictive analytics, genomics are going to be a big part of this. A lot of this is tied to Utah. I'm pretty sure it's the Mormons too. LDS. Like there's a lot in Salt Lake City going on. Also with NSA in the state and Bluffdale, the intelligence communities, epigenetic trauma. Okay, that's going to be factored in, and that's a really big thing around race, both for Black folks and for Indigenous folks. And I think bioprospecting is going to be woven into that too. The smart city tracking, again, it's my artwork, but we're a smart city. We're Comcast Machine Q is Internet of Things. As I mentioned, I don't know, did I mention to Michael that they're tracking people, parolees on blockchain in China? So these systems of tracking and tying into social credit scores are going. It's not just here. Like this is the EU talking about the Internet of Humans. I think really GDPR and the privacy access in the EU was about allowing you to use a digital identity system to brand yourself as a commodity in this world where human labor will be increasingly redundant to robotics, that you can brand yourself. And this is coming through IEE, the International Electrical Engineers and Engineering Association. But here they're talking about Internet of Things, blockchain, sensors, and harmonization across initiatives, because really what they need is interoperable data. The model for this in the US is DataZone, which is based in San Jose, low-income Latino communities in San Jose, where they are using interoperable data around pre-K, home visits, mental health, juvenile justice, because they need a data lake to pretend the predictive analytics. And I'm not saying the predictive analytics are even accurate, but they can't say that because they gave you Waterford Upstart Online pre-K that you didn't end up adjudicated as a youth if the data don't touch. So they need the harmonized data, and that's what Amazon Web Services, that's what Salesforce, that's what Microsoft are all about, the interoperable data systems. And yeah, about the Bloomberg. So this is my friend Julianne, she's working with me in Tulsa, but she's like, what work cities, it's like the stop and frisk that never stops and is increasingly automated. And that's the other piece about the policing, is that robotics are being incorporated into policing both in drone surveillance, but also Boston Dynamics has those robot dogs. That was also a nosedive episode, but they're actually the ACLU, the Boston police are using them to break into people's homes. They're not weaponized yet. But to say like, oh, we don't want to risk a police officer breaking down a door, we're gonna use a robot dog. So we have to think like this is Bloomberg's next phase. Phase 2 is to incarcerate the world. Yeah, and it's complicated because, like I said, so that's me in the Dirksen Senate building. So a friend and I went, this event to launch SIPR, which is the seed funding for all of this, and this is like me over here in the picture, and I'm like. It was the perfect encapsulation of all of the speakers were Republican senators, and all of the panelists were Obama policy wonks. And then the whole room, which was a big room, it was probably several hundred people, they were all the nonprofits. And I stood up there and I said, and that was me in this orange scarf, and I said, okay, so I got the question, I said, so I'm hearing in Massachusetts that they're looking to track social emotional data on middle school students for impact investing. And the cost offset is addiction and incarceration. So when do those kids get to stop being watched? Because for the pre-K bonds, they say the stop point is if you need special education when you're screened at kindergarten entry. So those kids, as bad as that is, they're in pre-K for a couple years, but then they enter kindergarten and they tick the box of what the outcome was. Well, what is it if it's some open-ended thing? I'm like that, what if you got pulled into that screening and you're in 8th grade and you were never going to be addicted, but like now for the rest of your life, your track is maybe like when you're, like you get off it when you're 50, 60, 70? And I asked that question, and you wouldn't believe the people who ran up to me afterwards, because they thought I was trying to figure it out, because I thought I just wanted to make it work. They couldn't imagine that anybody in the room would have a problem with that. I'm like, well, we can do it. I have 2 different people say, here's my business card, we can make an equation for that. programs too that are not all white, but this is a sickness that we would do this to people. I mean, that we have done it. Not that we have always done it, but that we're just doubling down. We're doubling down on this in really serious ways. So again, I had talked about the sustainability goals, the soda tax. Health is number 3, so Michael Bloomberg's make sure you're really healthy with your data. Gender equity is number 5, so all the stuff about educating girls and women, microfinance, like that's number 5. Hunger is number 2, so we'll track your malnutrition metrics. Racial or the prison incarceration, I think, is number 9, or 16, digital identity. They're all these things which we think are clearly things that need to be addressed are all being managed for finance. So again, just knowing the history, this is Georgetown. Georgetown is a center, the Beak Center is being funded for this. That people there at the top is from a Global Education Futures Forum map of terrifying things, and I'll send you the link if you sign, if you give me your email. But they're talking about a future where fortunes are made up of people, and the fortune size depends on the quality of the human capital. So they're actually talking that this is what it's going to be, and Georgetown has this history of slavery. He's selling off slaves to pay their debts, but they're just redoing it again as social impact. And so I'm just sort of here also to say for progressive faith-based communities, as we're thinking about socially responsible investing, is like, y'all need to tell people. Like when I went to Tulsa, there were folks from Oral Roberts, there were very conservative, evangelical folks, and I said, they're going to come. So you have to know in your heart, where is the position of your faith-based communities of all faiths to put people on blockchain or not? And we need to get our heads straight about that, because within the next 5 years, that's going to be on our doorstep, and we need to educate one another about what is the truth behind this machine. So that's us in Tulsa. We didn't have a room about this many people, but I don't know how else to do it, because you almost have to stand in front of somebody and tell them what's happening. So don't blockchain kids. So I have a good friend who is in San Jose. She's the chair of the education committee there, and she was actually instrumental in getting the position change of the NAACP around charter school legislation. Again, a lot of the charter schools are piloting these programs, which is, but it's in many things. But so we collaborated on 2 resolutions that passed in the state of California, one against pay for success finance and one against linking blockchain identity systems to public benefits. She was able to take the blockchain resolution to the national meeting in Detroit last July, and it passed. Now, they tried to gut it. Ed tech interests tried to gut it, because there were certain individuals from Brooklyn, actually, that cut a side deal doing ed tech gaming for special needs populations in New York City schools. And this would put a crimp in their plans. And so they tried to gut it for ed tech with an amendment that did not pass. But they've sat on it. They have not made this very public. But this company that had this ed tech side thing, the gentleman who was the lead of it has been in this business a very long time and was actually part of the rollout of Valium, the PR campaign. So these digital technologies and the way in which actually Big Pharma is developing digital video prescription video games now around ADHD and executive function with Harvard and Gates and Chan Zuckerberg. So talking about literally digitally engineering vulnerable children's brains for these impact commodities. So what I'm trying to do is say, hey, we did this. It's not just Allison and her friend at their kitchen table. The National NAACP, and I'm not saying it's perfect as an organization, but has said, this is a problem. Knowing our past history and how these coded nudges can be built in and how it will force people into making certain choices, we shouldn't be doing that. And so I feel like taking on, and this is why I've talked about abolition, I think digital identity systems, whether they're on blockchain or some other self-sovereign program, is the thing we need to take on. We need to take it on as racial capitalism, as digital enslavement, and as both white folks, liberal folks, to say this is what it is. This is our history. We understand our history of Northern liberalism and Northern finance and New York financiers in this past history. and how it's continuing, and we're gonna, for all of us, we have to, it stops now. Like because it's gonna come with drones, militarized drones and robot dogs, if we don't, for all of us. So that's sort of it. This is my little infographic. I'm trying to like figure out how to like chunk it together, but you've got these digital identity systems that capture your data and score you as human capital. You have privatized services that are tied with these contracting systems that then track people and create investment markets. It is about racial capitalism. Faith-based communities are going to be central in this. And we need to tell people before they weigh in thinking that they're doing the right thing, and it's not. So this is another piece I will say I am organizing with the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign here in Philadelphia, which is Sherry Honkala is one of the key organizers. She's with the Kensington Welfare Rights League, has been organizing around housing for many, many years. And we're going to Milwaukee for the DNC. Also, understanding that this technological system is I see it as a domestic military occupation, and a counterinsurgent program. There are many folks who are involved in the Poor People's Campaign. This is not the Poor People's Campaign. And I think what people need to know and may not be fully aware is that the Poor People's Campaign is run out of the Caro Center, and it's funded by Ford and the Novo Foundation, okay? This is not to say whoever, I don't know who knows this, right? And Reverend Barber is a very eloquent speaker, and I'm sure, I would hope, would never want to back something like this. But the Ford Foundation has $1 billion put into MRIs around impact investing. And to me, if we're not surfacing this, blockchain identity and coded behavioral management within the smart city environment for global finance, I want to know why we're not talking about that. Because I think those of us who are talking about poverty as an investment market need to know about that. And I don't really think the Ford Foundation is funding revolution. Like, I don't think it, like, for people who are, and I never thought I was going to be someone who needed to talk about revolution. Like, I mean, I was a corporate suburban kid. Ironically, my father worked for Procter & Gamble. He was a career Procter & Gamble guy. And you know who invented the Internet of Things? Procter & Gamble executive. He sold oil of Olay. He was an oil of Olay rep and lipsticks, and he used it to track inventory. And they said, man, that's good stuff. You go to MIT, scale that thing. Now there's 8 Internet of Things lab, and it's all to track supply chains. Global supply chains only were the supply chain. So yeah, so I'm a kid of a working class guy who made good, like Clyde's dad in corporate America, and now like, whoa, there's a lot of reality that we have to figure out. So yeah, look up the women of Wet'suwet'en. Look at what's happening in Canada. It's going to take being together in community. Like, I think spirituality is a big piece of this. I really do feel like it is about good and evil, and it's about what's been going on a long time. So anyway, yeah. Pardon? Okay. One last thing. So MacArthur Foundation is a big piece of this, and we were piloted for a program called Adovo, which was a prison system, a tablet-based online education behavioral therapy program in the Philadelphia prison system in 2014. And so in the system, in that time, families would pay to rent tablets, and then if you did enough therapy online, then you could earn credits for entertainment. So very much the prison piece of this, and population management through different levels of state control is a very much piece of this technology. So yeah, but just to say, like, I want to continue the conversation, and I don't know, like, I've talked to folks and I'm like, why do you say these things if you don't have the answer? What are we supposed to do? I'm like, don't know. I mean, I'm willing to be part of the conversation. I don't think that to expect, like, I'm part of the structure that created the problem, so I'm not disputing that I need to participate in the answer. I don't think, it's not my role to tell other oppressed communities what to do. Although I'm happy to collaborate to the extent that that collaboration is wanted. And I think we have to do it together in community. And I think ultimately it's going to have to be, I think the most effective resistance will be within international solidarity that it is Sharswood with Boa Vista, Brazil, with the Uyghurs, with the Wet'suwet'en, with Gaza, that it has to be global solidarity, and that it really needs to be interracial, and white folks, we have to own our stuff. So, yeah.
I have some questions.
Yeah, sure.
First of all, Allison, I want to tell you, I'm on your side, but I do have some questions that are going to be hard. You mentioned some very reputable organizations and foundations, such as the MacArthur Foundation.
Yeah.
And you're telling me that all these foundations have been hoodwinked into believing that gathering this data is a good thing.
Oh no! Do you know where the MacArthur money came from?
No.
It's insurance.
What?
It's insurance money. It's risk profiling.
But even then, Allison, these are organizations that have done a lot of good, and again, they are reputable. And do you think that putting tablets in prisons and having poor families pay for online behavioral therapy so people can earn credits for global finance investors is like a fundamentally good thing? Well, what if the outcome is good? Like, take the example where you had people buying food and having the electronic wallet that could identify whether they bought good food versus bad, and understand, healthy food versus unhealthy food. And I understand that there's differences in where people live and what people have access to, understanding that. But the loop there didn't say you're not going to ever, we're going to cut off your money. It's just you're going to get more when you make healthy choices.
But within austerity systems, the amount they put in will ultimately be configured such that unless you make the right choice, it's not coming from a place of abundance. This system is always coming from a place of scarcity, because whatever abundance is filtered up to the few people at the top.
I think it's a hard question, and I think you have to understand, kind of like Georgetown University, when they were going to go out of business, they sold slaves to keep. So I think the idea of good organizations, you have to be really careful with that idea, because a lot of times they may do something that's very nice, kind of like the presentation this morning, where it's a cover to kind of clean up or put on a good face for something that they've done. Another example would be Purdue, which is the #1 company that they went after for the opioid crisis. Well, of course, they declared bankruptcy in September, but I don't know if you know that what their long-term goal was to start rehab clinics.
Right. Oh, yeah. So they're just benefiting.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is just like the privacy issue this morning. Who gets to determine what I eat?
Right.
Yeah.
You either give me money, you don't give me money, but you can't tell me what to eat. And so I think that to speak to that, I think that everyone has the right to dignity, and with our first principle, we have the right to self-determination, and we have the right to privacy. We can choose what we want to do. And I think in the bigger picture of it all, I think we have to recognize that just because you don't, which I think is a big part of this, just because you don't have money doesn't mean you don't deserve dignity and respect, which is what I think, and I'm not saying this to you, but I'm saying this as to what this whole thing is about. But that people are collecting data on you and then determining how much respect, how much dignity, how much service you get in this world. And it goes back to the original paradigm, which I think is a deeply spiritual thing as to who is worthy and who is not. Yeah, and who decides.
Very good.
I think your information is tremendous, but every slide needs to be broken down, because I cannot go out and have a conversation around the family table and tell them what I learned today.
I gave you the short, my Tulsa version was 3 hours.
Person, Allison, and my God. I didn't kind of think it was happening, but the way you know, put up those slides, and then from this morning, it makes one feel powerless in a way. But I think...
But see, I don't think that most of us don't want this. If they knew, we would fight.
That's right.
Right?
If they knew.
Right.
Therefore, and it's not just your job alone, it's going to take other people to take your information and break it down so that it can be publicized.
And I will say too,
that's what,
and that's what actually,
it's education.
Yeah.
The public, we the public are very ignorant because we think a lot of these good guy corporations are very beneficial, when if we dig down and follow and knew more, we would know that they are also doing some bad things. But when we can't organize to protect ourselves unless this information is broken down and in a way that it's easier to understand with examples.
Well, and I think too, for me, a lot of it is, it's a collaborative experience, because I don't know, like, I learned about the Obama phones from a friend who has a long-term injury I'm a middle-class lady, I didn't know about the Obama phones. Like, I didn't, like, so it's the free phones that essentially are given out for people receiving social services so that they can both be in communication but also sort of tracked, and ultimately that's the benefits will live in the phones. So there's programs in the city now that are like, sign up for the phone, free phones, free phones, free phones. And so I'm not saying I don't want people to have phones, but it's important to understand the framework of that as a tool of this financial mechanism.
What are you talking about that? So tracking would be an inherent part of pretty much every cell phone that we have. So we're talking about something specific. Sorry.
So tracking would be an inherent capability of any cell phone anybody carries. So is there something specific or
For
special?
low-income people who can't afford a regular phone. They
Okay,
need
so you're
to
just
track.
saying now you're giving somebody who otherwise wouldn't have a phone
Correct.
a tracking device.
And you know those link systems that are downtown, the billboards that you see? So if you plug your phone into that, those are Google, that it pings your phone against every other link kiosk, and it tracks your movements. So that if you're an unhoused person who's using those regularly to charge your phones, which is important because these days a lot of our livelihood depends on being able to access those phones, that Google actually has programs called Sidewalk Labs, which is their smart city division. They're working in Toronto. There's a lot of pushback about the data collection within those smart city environments. But their premise is almost like you could create charter sections of cities with these privatized their own services, like, you know, like Dilworth Plaza, like, oh, we're gonna have a privatized public space with our own police force, and if you come in and you do things that we don't like, we'll put you on a pathway, you know, with these impact investing, and that's how the real estate piece layers into in the opportunity zone. So, but yeah, it's they need people who, and this the same way, it's very hard, like, the internet agreement that Comcast made for low-income, like cost savings for low-income folks, which I don't want anyone gouged, but if the program is to not really have school buildings and only have drop-in centers and have most kids doing school from a Chromebook, you need every low-income community person to have full-on internet access. And if you can get them to pay a couple $100 a year, then that's more money in their pocket anyway, Comcast. So there's nuance in this discussion of how do we talk about that? Like, surely, is it that we want an education system where kids have to have a Chromebook to do their homework? Or, and doing so means that you have a surveillance device in your house and you pay Comcast $200.
I mean, I think that's a perfectly reasonable like set of questions to actually have.
Like,
The like you said, the nuance and terribly hard part of it is like where does the value end and the risk?
Where does the value of something like that end and where does the risk begin?
Yeah.
Going back to the phones, for example, one of the big problems with the digital divide is that phones are by far the way that most people get broadband access to the internet these days, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that they don't have these phones means they're locked out of what we have decided is one of the more important communication mediums of our age.
Yeah.
So in attacking that problem, you allow people to have phones. Well, of course, unfortunately, every phone is a tracking device, and it then becomes a tool for whatever use you actually want to put it to.
Yeah.
So the question is, do we want to not have people online, or do we want to give in to this notion that the only way we can have them online is to provide them a phone and to live with the potential for this particular risk?
And I don't know.
Right?
And that's a thing like that I feel people who are in that situation should be empowered to have their voice, and then that as allies we should support their desires. So, yeah.
Well, we really all are in that position in terms of being tracked all the time.
Yeah.
So I appreciate greatly your assessment of the problems. I think it's a tremendous network of ways in which society is developing the ways many of us do not want it to go, and the minority and marginalized folks are suffering the most and will continue to suffer more. I think that's a really articulate way to put it, the way you do it. I have two concerns with your presentation. One is I hear an association that you make with broad swaths of people. So I wrote down people who work for the United Nations, a large number of nonprofits, higher education institutions, various branches of government, finance industry, and insurance. And I'm not sure what I hear you saying, but it's not good. It's like a generic swath of negativity about these folks. And my opinion is we're all involved in the problem, we're all involved in the solution. And I saw some of my personal friends up on the board who I know are tremendous people.
Do they know about human capital finance?
I haven't talked to them, but like the way you say the insurance industry.
Well, it is, but I mean, do you know the zone?
I just think that I think there's a sarcasm there and a denying of their inherent dignity and worth. And we have people working in the federal government right in this room that we don't whisper about sarcastically. So I just really think that is inaccurate and unfair. I'm a UU minister, and I participate in the problem all the time. And anyways, that's just some feedback on your presentation. Number two is, I forget what you said besides anarchist.
Oh,
you gave
communitarian. I think we should take care of each other.
Right. So for me, it was tough to hear your presentation with the start of communitarian anarchist because, so I'll just say that's not where I come from. I understand anarchy to mean no government. I think that's the definition in the dictionary. I know there's different definitions now, but I think the way we beat slavery, the way we got people to vote, we demanded from our government to minimalize the bad, follow the Constitution and law, and live out a moral government. And so that is my thought on how, because I don't think you're a Luddite or I'm a Luddite. We can debate how we use technology, but it's not going away, and we have to minimalize the bad of it and maximize the good and follow the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. That's where I come from. So I just want to state that we could be different perspectives on that.
We didn't beat slavery, by the way. I'm not sure what channel you're tuned into, but we didn't beat slavery. I have to say that. Excuse me, I'm talking and then I can listen when I stop talking. Yeah, so we didn't beat slavery, and I think it's fair to give feedback, but I think right now I'd like anybody who cared to applaud this young woman for the unbelievable presentation.
I
I think one of the ladies over there had mentioned, and I appreciate this, being able to scale back a little so that you can understand and explain it to your other families. Some of the work that Allison has done has been, it's so over my head that I know I need to let her get it out of her head so that I can catch on to some of the phrases and some of the meaning behind it. I just want to share one of the things that, as a parent of public school students, I have autistic twins that somehow made it. They're 18 now, they'll be 19 soon. One is at community college, and the other one's still at Wyden with a dedicated staff that's there. What was happening in the school district, and this is all part of what Allison is talking about with regard to data mining and modification of our public services and privatization. In order for a parent like me, my daughter came home with a sheet, and she said, "Mom, I can get scholarship help for college," and I'm a widow. And I'm just like, oh my God, great. And, you know, now I'm just waking up and I was like, okay, let's talk about it. She said, no, today's the last day. You know how kids do. I need the form signed today. And so I said, all right, let me see the form. And I'm ready to sign the form, but I'm scanning it because I'm just now waking up. And I saw FERPA, Family Education Rights Privacy Act. I saw FERPA there, and I read just that little line, and it said that parents had to indefinitely authorize release of their FERPA rights.
Just like HIPAA, yeah.
Yes. And so I just happened to be speaking at the SRC later on that same evening, and I could not believe that this was being put in our public schools, that this was okay. This is part of all of this pay for success and blockchain and commodification of our public and private services. All of this is being slipped through the cracks, and parents like me, like my block, like my community, which is Broad Nominee area, 8th District, you know, like a lot of parents, dealing with mental health, poverty, whether it's special needs population, or dealing with an elderly parent, you are distracted. They know we're distracted. The wag the dog that we see going on in politics with regard to the different races, whether it's mayor, council, or whatever, all that's wag the dog because they are not the decision makers in our major cities. It is the Chamber of Commerce. Yeah. It is PIDC. It is all of these other acronyms that we never look at. And the questions that get asked when they have the hearings where Bass and Green are there, those questions, those unended, empty conversations that never lead to any resolution that we bring forth perpetuate what Allison's talking about right now. I brought that up at the SRC, which is School Reform Commission meeting. Why on earth would a parent have to authorize indefinite release of their FERPA rights for their child, for the child that you're signing for, in order to get help for scholarships? And he was like, we would never do it. This is Dr. Height. We would never do it. This is not right. We would never. And I had to prove it. Long story short, what we see, what's happening right now, we've got to take what we can out of this. Whatever words that you can remember when you go home and Google, and you'll have access to Allison and wrench the gears, and take your time, see how it applies in your community, in your life today. It is a lot of information. God knows it's so much that is overwhelming. And I think that's where I'll end because I could just start rambling.
It is after 2:30, so we've asked Bob to be here till 2:30. We said the event was going to go till 2:30, so I feel a little bit like we need to wrap up. But Allison's probably still willing to talk to you. There was this sheet, so you can put your email address on there if you want to be able to continue to communicate with Allison.
Let's go this way. One stage.
Super fast thing.
We can discuss that.
Super.
But what I need, I like what Andrea said very much, of that sense of, you know, who's worthy, who's not, and who's getting to choose. And our congregation is doing the comic read on the indigenous peoples. And one of the things that came up for me, and I'll talk to you more after, but just a thought to bring up is, how does this compare to the discovery doctrine and colonialization? Because it sounds like it's kind of like another example of what's doing that. You know, it's sort of like, if we can see that piece in history and what that did, is this really the same? Because it was that sense of somebody else had to choose, and everybody just believed it, right? They just said, they're not really worth it, they're not human, they're not something. And this is doing that same thing, and so just a thought to think.